just wait for everyone to settle and then we'll get started. As I said earlier, thank you so much for coming. It is a 4:30 slot and it's awesome that you're here to learn about this stuff. I'm really excited. Thank you for joining me. So we are going to be talking about player hygiene and how to mitigate abuse in online communities. I really quickly want to add a quick caveat to this talk, and that is that you can't completely eliminate abuse from online communities nor from human nature. So please be aware that you can go to great lengths to mitigate abuse, but you can't eliminate it completely. And as I said, that's largely down to human nature and also is a reaction to online spaces. When you have so many people in online spaces, you are always going to have some degree of tension because everyone in your community is going to come from such a diverse background. It's okay, take it, sit down, it's all good. I'll wait, I can wait. I knew this was going to happen. It's okay, I love you too. So of course, when you have players coming to your game from such a diverse range of... I see you. Just skulking in at the back. You want to come sit right at the front? This is how you do abuse in real communities. All right, so because your players are going to come from such a huge range of diverse backgrounds, there's always going to be tension because they're going to be coming from so many different points of view and so many different lived experiences, and you can't avoid conflict. However, you can do your absolute best to stop players treating each other poorly and also to stop treating developers poorly. And these are two very, very different problems that actually have different fixes. And we're going to get into this as well. So this is a joke. And I realised now and when I first gave this talk, and I've left it in because I stand by it, but this is a Jane Austen joke. So maybe not the best audience for this, but I think it really rings true. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single studio in possession of a good game must be in want of online harassment. Because you cannot make a game that has any level of success and not face online harassment. And it's not fair, but it is also the reality of game dev, and I want to prepare you for this as developers, and I also want to teach you how to empower your community managers and how to empower them to foster positive communities. So, very quickly, my name is Gabriella Lowgren. I'm the Communications Manager at Infinity Plus 2, and you should definitely follow me on Twitter because it validates me. So if you're not following me on Twitter, get out your phone. I want to... No one? Fine, it's fine. I don't need to be validated today, it's cool. Oh, well, just make me look good, okay? But yes, so I'm the Communications Manager at Infinity Plus 2, so that of course does cover community management, but it also covers higher level communications duties as well, which is liaising with like marketing, PR, publishers, etc. So a lot of those things come under communications, and that is external as well as internal communications, which also sometimes means policy drafting, etc., etc. In game dev, you wear a lot of hats, and especially when you're a community manager, that is even more true. Because a lot of community managers are also social media managers, and they're very different roles, but very often they do coincide in game development because we do run with leaner, smaller teams. So you have to have a wide range of skills. So, this is a quick overview of some of the games that Infinity Plus 2 has made. Now, I do not blame you if you have not heard of us, because we have changed our name a lot, which does not help with brand recognition. But originally, we were SSG, which is Strategic Studies Group, and they made Warlords 1, 2, and 3, as well as Warlords Battlecry. And you're going to have to be a little bit older to know those titles, you know, showing my age a little bit, but they were great. And aside from that, they also made Puzzle Quest, which is the first title that really combined RPG elements with match 3 mechanics. And it was a huge hit, and there's games out there now like Magic the Gathering Puzzle Quest, which is, we don't make that game, but it is like our IP, and there's also Marvel Puzzle Quest. There was also like a Neopets Puzzle Quest on the DS quite a while ago. So that's sort of been one of our breakout hits, and that's led to Gems of War. So Gems of War has the same mechanics as Puzzle Quest, except it is a free-to-play game, and it is a live service game. And Gems of War is our bread and butter, and we do new content every week. And we do a significant amount of content every single week. It is a lot of work, and it has a really active community across all of its available platforms. And it's on a lot of platforms. We also do major updates every 8 to 12 weeks. And I think one of our programmers is here and knows how fun that is. So it's pretty much a match 3 game meets Magic the Gathering. you match your gems and you power up your troops and you get mana, and they each have special abilities that you then use to attack the opponent. There's like a PvP element, there's guild elements, there's a global chat. It is a surprisingly huge game. Also, it is available on a lot of platforms, like I mentioned. We are available on Steam, iOS, Android, Xbox One, PS4, Amazon, and Switch. That is a lot of communities. And all of those communities are different and they behave differently because the people that use platforms have their own sense of identity by choosing to use that platform. For example, of course, we've all heard the jokes about PC Master Race and the fact that Xbox attracts a lot of really interesting fanboys. So, for example, yes. So, for example, our Xbox community, everyone hates each other. And on the Switch, I don't know how this happened, but our community is a bunch of 12-year-olds cybering. And I wish I was joking. It's really fun reading those chat logs and banning people. It's great. Always what I want to do with my Monday morning after a weekend when they've just run rampant in all the global chat channels. But you also have to approach your communities on different platforms differently as well. So it's something to keep in mind when you are releasing across multiple platforms. And they respond differently to different styles of community management and different community guidelines. Now, just warning you in advance, there's a lot of office gifts in this. And like all things in life, it's going to get worse before it gets better, but there's a lot. So please enjoy them. And it would be really, really lovely if players behaved this way and asked themselves, would a smart person do that or would an idiot do that, and then behaved appropriately. Unfortunately, they do not behave this way, at least not naturally, though we can try and push them in the right direction. What I really want to get into for like the meat of this talk is different approaches to community management. And we're going to come back to, yeah, it's okay, Dwight's funny, I get it. We're going to come back to carrot versus stick a lot. There's two different ways of looking at community management, and the majority of community management is stick, and that is reactionary community management. Ideally, and the way that you're going to get the best behaviour from your players is through preventative community management, which is incentivizing good behaviour and having structures in place that help players behave well in your communities. However, most community management, as I mentioned, is reactionary. It is something that arises out of a need. So, for example, most community managers get hired when a development studio can't handle what's happening. So they'll notice that there's a problem, there'll be a huge increase in toxicity for whatever reason, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh wow, everything's on fire, what are we going to do? And then they hire a community manager, and instead of being able to set a positive example and mould the community in a healthy way, the community manager is just there trying to put out all the fires and trying to stop as much abuse as possible from reaching the developers. So a lot of the time, your community manager is a very effective meat shield. And this is why community managers burn out so quickly. Community management years are like dog years. If you have it's true. If you've lasted in community management for a year, it's pretty much the equivalent of 4 years. And this is why I think it's more than half of community managers don't make it past their first year. Because it's really intense, and getting that amount of abuse that frequently is not something that everyone can handle, for one, and I do not believe it is something that community managers should have to handle in the quantities that they handle it. It is a reality of the job, but I don't think that it should be as bad as it is, and there are ways to avoid this, and by practicing preventative community management instead of reactionary community management, we can empower our community managers and we can actually help our developers get less abuse, and we can help our community unto itself have less abuse as well. So one thing that I really want to touch on before I talk about the ways to actually put preventative community management into your game and actually include it as part of your development process is that, first off, you have to have good community guidelines. Now, if there's anything that you're going to tweet as a takeaway from this talk, I think that this line is really important. Your community guidelines are a living, ever-changing contract between you and your players. So they will change over time, and you can change them, and you should be updating them semi-regularly. And they're a really good way for your players to understand the behaviour that you want them to model. Also, it's important to succinctly outline what the appropriate behaviour is, and also to tell players what's going to happen if they don't, adhere to the community guidelines. If they violate said guidelines, there need to be clear consequences, and it needs to be easily understood by everyone, so that once they read the community guidelines, if they make a decision to then violate the guidelines, they know exactly what's going to happen to them. And you need to be fair. And it can be hard sometimes to maintain fairness when you're a community manager, especially when you're emotionally volatile or it's been a state of upheaval in the game and you've had more abuse than usual. But it's really important to maintain that emotional distance from your community to make good calls. But we will come back to that. It's important for your community guidelines to showcase the values of your game and also of your company. And they also should reflect the tone of your game. So no two communities are going to have the same guidelines. They're going to cover roughly the same things, like no hate speech, no threats, no like homophobic language, like no racism, etc. Like don't spam, don't try and sell your account, all those sorts of things. You're always going to cover those, but the tone and the way that you write them and some of the specifics should be different for every single title because you want them to reflect your game. So for example, something like, say, Call of Duty is going to have a very different tone than something like Gems of War. So Gems of War specifically is a game that is super cheeky. It's a title that is like a very loving parody and satire of our favourite fantasy tropes. It's kind of like my first D&D adventure. So it pokes fun at a lot of things in fantasy, and it is really cheeky and has a lot of pop culture references, and so our community expects us to banter with them a little bit. And so we do that in our community guidelines. The last community guideline in the Gems of War community guidelines literally says TLDR, don't be a douche. And that's very appropriate for our community, but it's not going to be appropriate for every community. So keep that in mind when you're writing your guidelines. And guidelines seem to be this thing that a lot of studios don't think about too much, but they're a really useful tool that helps model your community and also can be really fun for your community to read through if it reflects what you're doing in your game. And it actually can be like a fun document to write. I don't know, I think it's fun. Probably not everyone does. That's fine, but it's good. So, as I said, you have to outline the consequences, good and bad. So typically, your bad consequences are going to be bans if you have an honour system, honour loss, and a removal of privileges. So we also have a very active community forums, and I mean very active and very aggressive. And if people start attacking people in the community forums, they're not going to see a ban in game, but they are going to see a different kind of ban on the forums as well. So sometimes you have to have different banning methods across different platforms as well, so please be aware of that. And then you want to have good consequences when people do good things. So you can give them honour if you have an honour system, you can give them privileges, and you can give them exclusives. One thing that we do on our forums, and only on our forums, it doesn't even happen in the game, it's a separate thing. If you're a member of our community and you post on the forums a lot and we really trust you, we invite you to our beta, and it's exclusive and it's free testing. So it's great, honestly. Beta programs for really, really dedicated players, not only is it free QA, but they're stoked. Like, they love it. And they get a special little B next to their name. It's the tiniest thing. It's probably like 10 pixels, maybe 20. It's very, very small. And it just sits next to their avatar on the forums. And it gives them this feeling of authority over other players. And it elevates them within the community. And all people want to be recognised. And it's a really effective tool that costs us nothing, gives us free QA, and makes people happy. So those are the sort of things that you want to think about that aren't going to have any cost for your company, but are going to have a significant positive outcome. Now, we come back to the carrot versus stick, and we're going to be going into them in more detail. So one thing that I really want to cover in this talk is the way that you can actually integrate communications into your development process and how to make a successful honour system. This is definitely more useful for live service titles, things that have like frequent updates and where people are playing online frequently. It's not as useful, of course, for one game that you're going to put out there, but there are still a lot of really good things to take away from it. So once again, preventative versus reactionary. So we're going to go straight into preventative, and we will cover reactionary later. But the most effective way to incentivize kindness in communities is with positive reinforcement. And we do want to incentivize kindness. We don't just want to stop abuse. We actively want to shift a community's tone to positive. We want our community to help each other. We want them to be kind to each other, and we want them to treat each other with respect. And the last one is the absolute hardest one to do. However, a lot of these methods require in-game features. It's not easy to foster a really, really positive community and do preventative community management if you don't have a way of doing it in-game. As soon as something comes out of the game, it's typically reactionary. So my favourite thing is honour systems. I think that that is the most effective way to incentivize good behaviour, but community ambassadors, like I mentioned with our beta testers, is another great way to do it because they feel more defensive of the developers, which can be a really nice feeling if you're just getting attacked all the time. and they will then go into the community and they will offer advice and they will help people and they will nurture newer players, and then newer players feel welcomed and they stay longer. So it does actually aid in player retention. And yeah, so honour systems and community ambassadors can also be like used as a really effective tie-in, because when you get like a high honour ranking, you can then be elevated to being a community ambassador, and you can represent the game to the rest of the player base without us having to go through and answer questions and nurture new players. Our community can be self-policing to a certain degree, but also self-nurturing. All right, honour systems. I love honour systems. So, how many games can you think of that are live service games that have released with an honour system already in it? Yeah? True. But they also had to go through significant updates because it didn't work. It was awful when it first released, and now it is quite effective, but Overwatch released without one, and Overwatch has exceedingly high levels of toxicity. Like, it is a bit scary. Like, I would not play Overwatch with a mic as a woman. That would be a terrible decision. So honour systems typically happen after games have already been released and after they already have negative communities. And they do require in-game support, and it does take more of an investment, especially from the developers. Like, you're going to have to put down money. And that is one of the reasons why a lot of developers won't do them. But they make such a long-term difference to your community and the amount of abuse that all developers will receive, not even just the community managers. And it does help with player retention. It's actually a really smart idea. And when you're building these systems, the best people to talk to are your support agents and your community people. So a lot of developers lose touch with their communities because it's really overwhelming. And when you already have a full-time job and you have so many hats you have to wear, especially when you're an indie dev, you just can't keep up with your communities, and that's when they get angry. When they don't have access to you all the time as a developer, they will spit the dummy. And that's when community managers come in. And this is just, it's a better way to stop abuse on all of those levels, and it stops your developers getting it, it stops your community managers getting it, and it does really, really help. So even though it is more expensive, I highly recommend it for your long-term mental health of your team, for your community health, and also at the end of the day for player retention, because if your players are being abused by each other, they're not going to stay in your game even if they're really enjoying it after a certain period of time. Because it's really hard to play a game that you really enjoy when someone's threatening you every time you jump into global chat. So the best way to do honour systems isn't to offer anything in-game that you wouldn't be able to get through normal gameplay, if that makes sense. Like, you can't offer them a super-powered troop like in Gems of War, and they can just have that and dominate the competition, because it's unfair. The best thing to do is small things that show that they're someone that is trusted or that they've worked hard, and this can include like titles, cosmetic items, anything that signals to the rest of the community that this player is trusted and respected. And that's a basic human need, recognition and respect. So this is good. We like honour systems. I think it's a really, really good idea. And as I said, it's a really good idea to talk to your support staff and your community staff when you're building these systems, because they interface with your players on a daily basis, and they also understand what's going to motivate them to be kind. Because you might have an idea, be like, oh, all players will just like this, but unless you're in the trenches and seeing the specific attitudes and the specific tone of your community, you're not going to have the best idea. So, other honour systems, there are other ones out there. League of Legends is up here, here you go. And a lot of the time, as you can see, it is largely cosmetic. A lot of the time you're unlocking extra skins, or you have an opportunity at more like loot crates that unlock skins. It's largely cosmetic in nature. It's nothing that's going to change the balance of the game. So this is our honour system that we put in the game this year, and I'm very proud of it, and I'm very excited. A lot of our players weren't excited about it because it meant that they couldn't be horrible to each other. But I was really, really glad that we got to do this. It actually was bundled into a bigger social update. So not only did we put in the honour system, we also completely updated chat so that we could utilise the aspects of the honour system that we wanted to, because there was no point putting an honour system in and having cosmetic items and titles if there was no way for players to show them off. So we had to actually, I think we ended up building our own chat, because in the past we'd been using like something else, and it was a really, really big endeavour, and it's been fantastic for us. So as you can see here, you've got like collections, you've got emoji packs, portraits, titles, and a lot of those exclusives are due to having high honour or being recognised by the developers. Over here, you can actually see how easy it is to do honour. You want honour to be accessible. It can't be something that players have to go out of their way to find, or they're not going to find it useful and they're not going to value it either if it's too difficult. So every day you can give out 5 honour, and you can say if someone was helpful, if something that they did was fun, or if it was a high five. And you can access that from the chat, and you can also access that from PvP. So if you find a team that you really like that's not the predominant meta, that you're just really annoyed you've been fighting for the last 3 hours to get to the top of the leaderboard, you can be like, that was fun, on an interesting PvP team as well. And your honour replenishes every 24 hours. You want it to be a resource that is finite, but you also want to encourage your players to use it. So we found that 5 honour points was optimal every 24 hours. So as you can see, access to exclusive cosmetics. This is also why we added emojis, portraits and titles, because we could bundle them all in together. And also, this is something which, this is between us, okay? But one thing that players didn't know that we did is that players with high honour rankings are given more weight in their player reports, because our players can report each other in game if they think that someone is cheating. Most of the time they're not, but they can actually report inappropriate chat. And players with high honour, their chat reports are given more weight and they rise to the top, and we review those first. And also every single time we either say yes to a player report being like, yep, their behaviour was abusive, or no, they're going back in game, the player that made the report either gets more weight added to their reports in future, or they get weight taken away from their reports. And that's been really useful for our support team and has made their lives a lot easier. So we actually had this planned, and we wanted to do a social update for about 2 years before the publisher let us, because it's very hard to pitch to a publisher because it costs money and there's no clear return on investment. So 2 years later, we finally got to do it, and it's been one of the, in my opinion, being your communications person, it's been one of the best changes that we've made to the game. So, the stick. This is how most community management works, and this is how most people police their communities. And it doesn't incentivize kindness or positivity, it just punishes bad behaviour. So it doesn't model how you want behaviour to be, it just says, no, that behaviour was bad, we're going to punish you for it. And it's not effective over time because it's not holistic. It doesn't look at the root of the problem, it just reacts to the bad behaviour that's being exhibited. So typically it's warnings, escalating bans, and eventual permabans. We don't permaban people from our game unless they're cheating, but we will permaban them from global and guild chat. And guilds are really important in our game, and people don't want that to happen, but we have really clear community guidelines. Typically you get a 1-day ban, a 3-day ban, and then week-long ban. If you're going to keep being awful, we'll permaban you. We don't permaban easily because we do believe that all players are capable of reform, and people make mistakes. You're not always in a good state of mind, or something may have happened, or someone may have provoked you, and all of those things need to be looked at as well. So ideally you actually want to avoid banning players at all costs. You want to keep them in your game, and you don't want to upset them, and you want them to spend money. So you don't really want to ban them. You have to ban them when they violate community guidelines and they attack each other, or even sometimes the developers, though it's a bit more iffy there. We're a lot more lenient with abuse towards us than we are to other players, because at the end of the day, your job as a community manager and the job of your community guidelines is to keep your community safe. Not to keep your developers safe so much, though, as a flow-on effect from keeping your community safe, typically developers will then have less abuse, which is great. You're not here to censor your community, but you are here to look after them. It's a really fine line to walk. So political discussions can be rough, but they're fine as long as they don't devolve into harmful arguments. I mentioned much earlier that many different people from different walks of life are going to play your game, and they're going to want to have discussions about their different walks of life and their different belief systems. And as long as it doesn't get abusive, it's totally allowed. So sometimes community managers have to step back and be like, okay, I really disagree with what this person's saying, and it's really inflammatory, but if it doesn't violate community guidelines, you cannot ban them. And it's not the right thing to do to ban them, because happy players that aren't banned spend money. And you have to be really fair. Even if you disagree with someone, they deserve just as much respect as someone that you do agree with. And that is something that can be hard for people. You want to facilitate safe discussions, and only ban when it is absolutely necessary. It's also vital to let players know why they're being banned. Can't just ban someone and be like, they're just like, no, this is not fair, this is horrible, and they'll go onto Google Play and be like, I was banned unfairly with, like, you know, no warning, and then you get this whole influx of 1-star reviews. It's great fun. You have to let them know why they've been banned and be very, very clear. And I find that the best way to get good results and play reform is to be kind when you talk to them about why they've been banned. Send a little email and be like, unfortunately, you exhibited this behaviour, give them some examples. That is in violation of our community guidelines. Take some time to cool off. We look forward to seeing you in game after your ban period ends. And surprisingly, a lot of the time they respond really well to that. And they're quite happy to then come back a little bit later and they're like, oh, sorry, like I did get a bit heated. And for someone to apologise to you on the internet, like that's impressive. Every time it happens, I'm like, is this real life? It's wonderful. All right, so this is a bit more about like the stick feature and this is how it works. I'm going to tell you something, I don't know if it's going to shock you, but it was really, really hard for our support team. But before we had the option to report players in game, there was no way for a player to report someone easily if they'd been abused. And they would have to, oh, sorry, I should probably talk with the microphone. They would actually have to take screenshots of whatever platform they were playing on and then go out of their way to send those screenshots to support for us to review, for us to ban someone. That is a lot of steps. That is a huge barrier of entry to someone making a report about someone who has abused them. And that was something that we really had to consider when we made this update as well. So not only did we implement the honour system, we also wanted there to be a much easier way to report bad behaviour in-game. So that made this update like a really major overhaul and a major update for us. I picked Gobby because no one in America understands why that is rude, so we couldn't change their name, but I thought it was funny, so I wanted to put it in here. Gobby's actually one of our best players in the game, and they were stoked when I sent them a little screenshot of this slide. They were like, oh my god, I'm going to be so famous. And I was like, yeah, famous for a really rude word in Australia, but live your best life.
What's Gobby?
Just do a Urban Dictionary it.
All right.
That's probably your best option. I feel like it's not PG-13 for me to say what it is. Anyway, and it's really easy to report someone. You click on them in global chat or in PvP if you think that they're cheating, and then you just say why you're reporting a player, and it auto-generates a report which then sends through to our support team, and then they review it, and then they decide if the report is valid, and then they will, you know, ban the player for whatever length of time. We keep a really good list of how long people have been banned for previously, and then we also have like a way to escalate bans. We have a really clear procedure in-house that we follow, and it's really fair and it's lovely. And we always err on the side of softness with banning. We don't come down too hard because, as I said, you want to keep your players in game and you want them to be happy. And we knew it was a serious issue that players would have to. Oh yes, you've got your hand up. Do you?
I was just wondering, do you then send the report if someone's done the report of someone and it's found that they did do something wrong?
Yep.
Do you then send something to the person who did the report saying, yeah, we've followed up? And
We don't. And this.
we do.
We do? Oh, we do. Okay, there you go. Thanks.
And what do you say to them?
Pretty non-committal. It's like, thanks for your report, we've taken action.
Okay.
No details.
Can't even action just be inaction though? Oh, but we can't be any more specific because we don't like naming and shaming with bans. So even if they've reported like 4 people, they don't know who was necessarily banned either, because we don't like to name and shame. And a lot of players want you to name and shame desperately. And they'll do anything they can to get you to name and shame. And it's like, no, that's not what we're about. We're not going to come out and tell you this stuff. It doesn't foster a good community. We don't want this. All right, so, wait, did I skip a slide? No, we're good. The benefits. Though we receive a lot more player reports, because it is so much easier to report players than having to like take photos or screenshots and then email them into us or send them through support, the player reports that we do receive over time are much less extreme in nature. It's fantastic. Nowadays you might get like the occasional person like trying to swear or like threaten someone, whereas in the past we would get like really horrific behaviour. There've been instances where someone has come on and just said things that were just so terrible that I've had to permaban them instantly. And we don't have instances like that anymore, which is fantastic. So even though we're getting a lot more player reports and it has generated a little bit more work, they're easier to get through. Lending them weight or taking away weight has really helped in the long run. And the shift in player behaviour has been huge. And that is evidenced by how many less serious incidents we have these days. We also get way less negative reviews with low ratings due to toxicity in global chat. I cannot even tell you how many negative 1-star reviews we got about people being like, there's no moderation in game chat, there's no way to report people, like I've been treated horribly, and it just makes your heart hurt because you don't want your players to be treated badly. So that's been really, really lovely, even just to see the change in our Google Play rating, things like that. So there are like really positive changes that you can see that you can actually see like numerically as well. And players better understand how to behave. They police themselves. We don't do global moderation outside of doing bans and reporting. And that's also because there is a lot going on in global chat we can't afford to be there all the time, and community moderators are a terrible idea. Never do it, never do it. Just don't do it. Look, it's an eyebrow up over here, that's fair, I will tell you why. But there's been a lot of issues with community moderators unless you really trust someone that they let power go to their head very, very, very quickly, and then they will abuse that power. And on top of that, does anyone, maybe it's just me, does anyone remember the Ultima Online scandal? Oh yeah, we got someone here who does. Basically, they were doing a volunteer system with mandatory hours of people that would be moderators, and as soon as you have mandatory hours, class action lawsuit. So don't do it. It's just not worth it. If you can have in-game systems that largely take care of that for you instead of active moderation, you're going to be spending less money, you're not going to be worrying about your moderators letting it go to their head and then going on power trips, and you will hopefully avoid a class action lawsuit. It's great. And by the way, they won it. So they actually won. It's not great. Oh, and overall, the best benefit of all, a kinder, more inclusive and more active community. When your community is happy, they're more active and they go out and be your ambassador. So they'll get new players into your game, they'll tell their friends, they'll help newer players, they'll nurture them, they'll add them to their guilds, they'll want everyone to play and they'll want everyone to stay in the game because they're having such a good time. And that's ideally what you want. You can't control how your players talk about your game, whether that's positive or negative. So you need to give them as many good reasons as possible to speak about it positively to each other and to the general public, and to try and bring in as many new players as possible. Because one of the best ways to get more players in live service games is through word of mouth. So yeah, they're your public ambassadors whether you want them to be or not. So give them as many tools as possible to be happy, positive public ambassadors and not to try and sabotage you or abuse each other or the developers, which is also very, very, very likely. So if it all goes according to plan, you now have a less toxic community. So the best way, of course, to have a community that's as least toxic as possible is to have both carrot and stick. You want to be practicing preventative community management and reactionary community management. Unfortunately, most places start at reactionary and then never move through to preventative. And I think that they're best used in conjunction with each other. And if you have the money or you can convince your publisher 2 years down the line to let you do a major social update, I would recommend it. But honor systems are a great way to do that, but also in smaller ways, if you don't have the ability to do that, is small cosmetic items on things like forums or even in-game. If someone has done an amazing thing, you can send them a code with like a cosmetic skin. Things like that, which are outside of honor systems, can also be great as well, but an honor system is your most effective way of doing it. That being said, there was pushback from our community when we implemented an honor system because they didn't want to be held accountable for their behaviour and they didn't want to have to behave well. But at the end of the day, it's been one of the best updates we've done, even if every now and then there'll be like a forum topic that pops up from one of our forum regulars that's just like, oh, the honor system's poo. It hasn't done anything. And then on our end, we're like, but it's actually completely changed the tone of the game and the way the players treat each other. But it's harder for them to see that when they're living in it if they were some of the players that weren't suffering from bad behaviour prior. And I have gotten through a good like 20 slides and a lot of content. Pretty proud of that. So, you know what time is it? What are we looking at? Great, we're going to stop there then. Any questions? I will answer all your questions if you would like. Oh. Yes, I see hands. Also, it's the last session. If you do need to go, like, no pressure.
On the topic of community management, is it something that you think needs more professional training before anyone even goes into it, rather than, hey, I've got some gumption and I think I can do it?
Whose phone is that? Great. Sorry, just like calling people out here. I don't think it's easy to professionally train community managers because it is such a specific job and skill set. I think the best way to train community managers is to work under other community managers that have done it for a period of time. But the reality is it is so unusual to ever be in a position where there's more than one community manager on a team. I think it would be great if there was some rubric or like some course that people could do to move into it. But more important than professional training, I can't believe I'm going to say this, I think that personality is really integral to community management in a way that it's not to other roles. and also having a thick skin. And that's not something that you can necessarily teach people, is how to like have that emotional distance from some really nasty content that you're going to come into contact with semi-regularly. So yeah, I think that it would be great if there was something, and I think training under someone is your best option, but it's very unlikely. But that is probably the best way forward. Yeah? Yeah?
I was going to ask you about how you cope with all the nasty stuff, but you pretty much just taken care of that. But if there's anything you'd like to comment or any specifics, I'd be interested.
Therapy's great.
Yeah.
Highly recommend therapy. I think I've always had a pretty thick skin, so a lot of this stuff comes pretty naturally to me, but it does affect me, and especially when I'm more emotionally volatile due to my personal life or, you know, a really stressful period at work, that stuff, it's a lot easier for it to affect you. And I am so lucky that I have the best team, and I'm empowered more than any other community manager that I've ever met to behave the way that my boss thinks, like, he trusts me to behave the way that's the most appropriate for a situation. And if it gets to a point where I'm like, I can't do this today, he'll be like, it's cool, I'll get one of the support agents to jump on some of your social channels and you can do something else. Because I don't just do communications anymore, I also do narrative. And if there are days where I'm like incapable of reading another death threat, I'll just be like, you know what, I'm just taking 8 hours off, I'm going to write something. And I won't have to interface with that directly for a period of time, but I always will have to come back to it. It's part of my job. And I'm very, very lucky. Doing a lot of these things has made it a lot easier because there's less abuse. But actually, in terms of like processing those things, it really comes down to the support of your team and your coping mechanisms. And there are healthy coping mechanisms and unhealthy coping mechanisms, and being able to talk to your friends or your partner or your family is a really good way to unload a lot of that heavy emotional burden. But that can also be hard because you don't want to overwhelm other people. So really, I think the biggest one is your team and how they support you. And then, you know, how sensitive you are also comes into play. And I think that that's just down to the person. Yeah, I hope that answered your question. Don't just drink wine. That's what I did at the start. I learnt better. Anyone else? Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things that I was super interested in was the honour system stuff that you were talking about, and specifically the positive behaviour and recognition of positive behaviour. In that slide, it looked like that was kind of peer-driven feedback on positive actions. I was just wondering if there was any like mechanical measurement that you were using for positive actions that a player might be taking, like giving an item to a lower level player, or is it all just peer-driven?
It's really just all peer-driven. We don't have the systems in place to measure anything else at this point in time. So it is very much that our community is self-policing. And it's worked really well that way. I think it would be even better if we could have a better idea of like player actions and why they've submitted honour. But then I also think it gets harder to submit honour because somebody has to then justify it or type it out. And it's not easy to type stuff out on like an Xbox or a PlayStation. I think for certain titles that could be great, but it does make it more difficult as well. I think there's something there though. I think that could be really cool. I don't know how you do it. Just pass the microphone around. Or you can just yell out, like, I can hear you. It's a small room. Okay, yeah, no, you have to have the microphone, sorry.
So you've given us some great qualitative information. Do you have any quantitative data you can share?
You want me to give you numbers? I can't really give them to you, unfortunately, because you have to remember that a lot of that stuff I'm not at liberty to disclose. And that's going to be the case, unfortunately, with most of these talks and most companies as well. So, like, I've given you as much as I possibly can, but it's not so much the company that's always the issue. You also have to think about publishers and how much they want out there. So I would if I could.
I have one more question. Yeah. Have you thought about applying machine learning to detect toxicity or to detect positive honour?
It's a lovely idea, but I don't know where we're going to get the money, and I don't know how we're going to convince the publisher to do it. A lot of these ideas are so beautiful in theory, but they're just not doable due to the restrictions of like your company or your infrastructure. We've got to go with the microphone. I think there's someone at the front who's been waiting a little bit.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
I'm sorry that I had to look up that word now.
I'm sorry.
Disappointed. But with
Apologise.
with the new implication of the honor system, did you guys have to go over any like specific hurdles with like the GDRP and like anonymizing player data along with GDPR? Yeah.
No one knows who's given them honour. So like it's never really an issue. And
No,
also,
I'm talking about like your local like data that you guys collect for all this.
this is not something can answer.
Oh, okay.
I just have no idea. We had some issues with bits and pieces of that in the past, but it actually didn't end up being a huge issue with our game because we don't actually store a lot of like that very specific player data anyway. And like we don't even have in our game when players are online, like you can't even see when someone's online unless they're posting in global chat or guild chat. Like you have no way of knowing. Like already, like as a game, it's fairly anonymous in terms of those sorts of things.
All right.
I wish I could tell you more. I think Anna at the front was like, was ready.
Well, I was just going to respond to... I hate microphones. I was just going to respond to the machine learning thing, how that often becomes an issue because whatever keywords that you can flag for automatic pickup for things, people find ways around it to be offensive. So like it doesn't matter how well you try to like train your system to pick up and flag keywords. If people want to be awful, they'll find ways to be awful. So it's better to incentivize the good behavior than to try get machines to flag those things. Sorry, that was just an extra comment.
I think that people have a better context when they make reports as well because they have an idea of the situation around it and a bit of the emotion behind it as well.
So as community managers, we're often the conduit between between like receiving bug reports or things and going through to the team. So a lot of the time, I just want to see if you had any advice on trying to get things changed, say, or communicating with the developers that something's important because you're receiving a lot of abuse for it. And sometimes they don't actually listen or they won't action it, and you're constantly still trying to field, thank you for the report.
Yes.
We'll look into it, but we know we can't.
We're really lucky in that we have an in-house support team, which has changed everything and is like one of the best things about our company. So having an in-house support team, they work through Zendesk, and whenever they get like certain amounts of bug reports, they can then export hard data about them. And one thing that I find really, really useful, I went to Darcy's talk last year, which was about Google Play reviews and how you can use reviews to track pain points. And that's something that I've been doing ever since. And every single time we get a 1-star review, I track it in a spreadsheet. And it is exceedingly time consuming, but you have to think that if somebody's taken the time to post a really negative review, there's going to be hundreds of players that have had the same issue and are really upset, but haven't been bothered to then go through and write a review. And so having that hard data is a really good way to drive home to developers what the serious issues are. So something like that is really, really useful. Also, I do like a weekly community roundup, and I also have a bug report board, and every time I get a bug report across any platform, I'll add to that. And on top of that, there's also a quality of life list. That is stuff that players are frequently requesting, and then you sort of like rank what they want the most. So not only with like bugs and things that need fixing, there's also like quality of life improvements too, and having those as 2 separate documents is really good. So I would try and track as much as you possibly can, especially through the review systems, and really, really drive home to your developers that if somebody is leaving a negative review, it's a lot has gone to the point where they've left that. They've actively gone out of their way to leave you a negative review because they're so affected by an experience. And you've probably lost a couple other 100 players from that alone that just haven't left a review because they've just been like, this is too hard, I'm out, screw this. So that's probably the way that I would try and, like, that's the way I think will lend it the most weight. So give it a go. It works for me.
Yeah, always the silent majority. Yeah, always is, yeah. I was just wondering, so the examples you were giving were very specific to the type of game that you were working on. Is there any other examples from other community managers or games that you've seen that are really good carrot situation or good honor systems that you've seen yourself? I
really like the way the League of Legends one has become now. It started off very, very bad, and it's gone through several iterations to get to the point where it's at, and you have like an increased chance at like skins and things like that, but it's always like cosmetic benefits. And you'll find that majority of good honor systems are cosmetic benefits. Unfortunately, it's really hard to get hard data on other people's honor systems because they're in the same position as me. I can't say anymore. And you can only really go by the general feel of a community, which you're only going to really notice when you're really active in a community as well. So I can like point out a few that I think are like really good. Like League of Legends, I think does a really good job. I think there's room for improvement in Overwatch, but you're typically going to find these honor systems in like more widely spread like live service games. I haven't See, I've seen a few bad ones. I don't want to say any specific names. I don't want to get in trouble. But what I think makes a bad honour system is when it takes too long to get honour, because then players are de-incentivized from being kind because they see how long it takes, and then they see that these players that have been around for years longer than them are going to have things that they're never going to have, and then they get really upset. That's probably like the biggest thing that I think you need to consider in terms of like that's what really makes an honour system bad, or if it's too hard to use. If the barrier to entry is too high, it's too hard to access, doesn't make sense, players aren't going to use it. So those are the two things that make it bad. What makes it good? It's not too hard to make it good if you can commit the time to making it and you understand your game.
Yeah, and just another one was I noticed you just had like you said there was a limit of 5 on that you could give a day. So what was the reasonings behind that?
We just found that it was enough to give it weight, but it was also enough that they felt free to spend it. Like if you give them 1 a day, they're going to like, you know, really, really get anxious about who they're going to give their like 1 honour to, and then they're not going to be incentivized to use it. We just thought 5 was a great number because players felt like they could spend it in a way that made them comfortable within their play session time, and it refreshed every 24 hours, and that's just been great. It's just been just a good number. We just started with it and it's worked well, and now we do it, and that's it. It was pretty lucky, actually.
Hi, first just wanted to say that I was a huge fan of Puzzle Quest. I bought the game on Xbox 360 and also on DS later.
The remake is out on the Switch.
Oh, okay.
It's really good. We just released it like 2 weeks ago.
Okay, good information.
Yes.
So my question is, what do you say to the developer who are so low on resources that they already have developed, say, like a feedback system in-game, but still... I think they don't have the honor system, so still a lot of the toxicity are still there.
Yeah.
And also people will leave like negative reviews after they get banned from the report system feedback to developers. And they said, I think the developer said to me, he alone has spent more than 25% or like 20% of their dev time just on that like community reporting system, because like he's like basically a solo developer.
That's hard. It's hard when you don't have the resources. And I mean, your best option is to hire a community manager, but that's not always in the scope of possibility.
Yeah.
So it comes down to investing time, and that comes down to your community guidelines and to finding other ways to incentivize players outside of honour systems, like with cosmetic benefits or open, like not open, I should say closed betas. Something like that, which can give people a sense of importance and something to work towards, because if they're like highly toxic, they're not going to get an exclusive cosmetic or a title or access to the beta and free testing for us. Like things like that are what you can do in the meantime until you have the ability to put these more like complex systems in game. That would be where I would start. And clear community guidelines. Do that 100%, and have a way to tell players why they've been banned. You're still going to get negative reviews from people that have been banned because they're like, I was in the right, and it's like, oh my God, you literally used like 4 horrible slurs in the space of like 2 lines, like well done team. But it happens. Not all people are good people.
And the second question is, do you think the text filter is like, does anyone here still use text filters?
We do. We filter out rude words.
And is that filter localized?
We get data from like elsewhere that has different slurs and different languages that auto updates and put it in. But then also sometimes we have really interesting instances, like the word cock is, you know, totally not allowed to be said in game. It is like filtered, but we have a troop called the cockatrice, and every time you try and say cockatrice, it doesn't work. Yeah. And it you just never know what's going to happen with things like that. And then sometimes you'll like have a rude word in one language that's like a totally normal word in another language.
Or like assassin.
We allow ass. Ass is fun.
Okay.
We're very pro ass. That's not an issue.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. All right, last one. Let's go.
Just favorite tools for community management, like Discord versus Twitter versus other means to communicate with your community.
Personally, I love Twitter, but that's because you can be so savage on Twitter and it's just part of what Twitter is. And it makes me very, very happy. We are active on so many different platforms for games, but also social platforms, and it's overwhelming. I really recommend, and everyone has their own favourite social media management tool. And I really, really like Sprout. So Sprout feeds all my accounts in, so it does like my Facebook, it does my Twitter, things like that. And then I can go through and reply to things in one newsfeed, and I don't actually have to go into separate programs and go between them. It's fantastic. And then I can also schedule all of my social posts and my social content, any content, to go out across them as well. But honestly, probably like even more than Twitter actually, I live stream for my company twice a week. And I love it. Like, there are some days I get there, I'm like, I really don't want to live stream and talk to players because they hate me. But most of the time, it's really, really nice. And even the stream has gotten more positive since we've implemented a lot of these features. And I think that live streaming for developers is a really underutilized tool to communicate with communities. And it's becoming more and more popular. And it adds a level of transparency that a lot of companies don't have, which makes your players trust you more. And players never trust developers. The only time I've ever seen players stop abusing each other is to join forces and abuse developers. And I think it's a really underutilized tool, and I'd like to see more, like studios, really go for it. And I get like my boss in, we do dev Q&As with like the head of live ops and like our creative director, our CEO, and all of that stuff is really valuable to communities too, because then they can get direct answers to their burning questions. And I'll answer a question. I have a fair amount of authority with the community now, and I've been there for a while. But a lot of the time they're like, you're just a community manager. And I'm like, great, like awesome, love this. And they're like, we want to hear it from the dev. And I'm like, he sits like 2 meters from me. I just asked him, like, what difference does it make whose avatar? I'll just log into his account and reply for you. And yeah, streaming goes a long way to help build those relationships with your player base. Yeah, you're welcome. I think that was the last question. We're done. You're free. You're free. Thank you.